An unexpected twist offers hope when all seems lost. The fluorescent lights flicker weakly, humming low in the cramped military office where John sits rigidly, his calloused hands trembling ever so slightly as they grip the cold edge of the desk. Beyond the glass window, the sprawling military base bustles. Soldiers march in formation, orders shouted sharp and clear, the echo of purpose and discipline just beyond reach. But here, all is sterile, empty of life except for the stale air thickening the room. John's eyes darken under heavy lids, shadows cast from countless sleepless nights etched deep in his weathered face. His military jacket, frayed and marked by war's invisible scars, hangs loosely on his thin frame like a faded badge from a past life he cannot quite leave behind. Beside him, on the scratched tabletop, sits a plain manila envelope, official, unyielding, a prison sentence disguised in bureaucracy. He pulls the letter free, its flap crackling like dry leaves in the cold wind outside. The sharp scent of paper cuts through the silence. His throat tightens as he unfolds the page. The words inside hit harder than any bullet. Reassignment of military service dog effective immediately. Rex. The name echoes in the hollow chambers of John's heart. The German shepherd who once was more than a companion, a brother in arms whose steady gaze and calm demeanor saved him from the abyss countless times. Their bond, forged in firefights and broken nights, now threatened by rules no soldier ever fights for. John's fingers trace the dog tags hanging around his neck, cold metal against worn skin, each tag a grim tally of sacrifices, memories too sharp to face alone. He looks up, expecting to see Rex's alert eyes, the tail's low wag, the silent assurance that they were still together. But the room is empty. The leash coiled on the floor, limp and lifeless. A faint rustle outside pulls his gaze to the window. A dog barks distantly, sharp and fleeting, underscoring the unbearable weight settling in his chest. The sterile sounds of the office, the ticking clock, the soft thud of footsteps down the hallway, the chaos inside him. The door creaks open, and a thin-faced clerk steps in, her voice flat, rehearsed. "Private John Matthews, you have 30 days to arrange for the transfer of Rex. This decision is final. Questions or appeals will not be entertained." Her eyes avoid his, betraying an inkling of sympathy she quickly buries beneath procedural cold. John nods silently, swallowing the lump lodged in his throat. His mouth opens, then closes, words caught in the vice of helplessness. He signs the acknowledgement form with a lingering pause, the pen scratch a slow death knell. Outside, the sun begins its descent, bleeding orange and crimson through the low window panes. The colors paint the walls with a fleeting warmth, mocking the chill settling in John's bones. He clutches the leash tighter, knuckles white, as if the leather could somehow keep Rex tethered to him. His mind races, replaying fractured memories, Rex beside him in the mud-soaked trenches, alert and brave. Rex nudging his hand on lonely nights. Rex the only constant in the fog of a life unsteady and scarred. But none of it matters now. The system that once hailed them as heroes sees only paperwork and protocols. The room shrinks around him, the walls close in with bureaucratic finality. Each tick of the clock mocks the seconds slipping away from the bond he feared losing most. A distant siren wails some mournful cry blending with the fading day. John rises, his legs stiff, carrying the weight of a man stripped of his anchor. He pauses, the leash still wrapped around his fist, and looks through the window once more. The base's orderly chaos, the distant dogs barking, and the setting sun create a tableau of opposing worlds, one orderly and detached, the other frayed and desperate. He steps outside, the heavy door closing behind him with a final thud that seems to echo inside his chest. The cold air bites at his face, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Across the parking lot, the silhouette of Rex appears, a brief glimpse through the fence, sharp ears pricked, eyes searching, calm yet uncertain. John's breath fogs in the cooling air as he whispers, almost to himself, "I'm not ready." The leash slips from his grasp, falling to the gravel with a soft clatter, unheeded but symbolic. The sun's last light touches the earth, casting long shadows, an unfinished promise hanging heavy between fading warmth and encroaching dusk. He stands frozen, caught between a past that haunts and a future unknown, the world holding its breath as the first act closes on a solitary man and his silent plea against inevitable separation. The door to the small house creaked closed behind John as he stepped inside, a hollow echo marking his retreat from the outside world. The muted gray light of late afternoon filtered through threadbare curtains, casting long shadows across the faded carpet, snaking up the walls like dark fingers stretching toward every corner of the room. Silence laid heavy, hurrying, oppressive absence where the thrum of life once beat steady and true. He dropped the leash on the wooden floor with a soft clack, the rough leather cold and stiff beneath his fingers. Slowly, hesitantly, he sank into the worn armchair by the window, the fabric familiar but unforgiving. His chest rose and fell unevenly, aches lodged deeper than muscle or bone, like a wound without a scar. Outside the glass, bare branches tapped nervously against the sky, a timid rhythm that echoed his own fracturing composure. John closed his eyes, swallowed hard. Memories rushed, quick, sharp flashes of Rex's eyes, bright and focused in the haze of battle. That steady, unconditional presence. The soft warmth leaning in after dark, the silent understanding in every nudge of a cold nose. A brotherhood forged in fire and silence, now fractured by ink and policy. His fingers, trembling now, traced the edges of his dog tags resting against his chest. Cold metal pressed into warm skin, the sharpness a brutal reminder. The war was over, but its shadows clung to him tighter than any uniform. The tags chafed against a worn shirt, just as the rules chafed against his soul. Outside, the quiet town moved in slow, deliberate gestures, windows dimmed as daylight diminished, the faint bark of a distant dog, the soft roll of a car tire on wet pavement. But inside, John felt the world contracting, shrinking to the narrow prison of his own thoughts. His mind fought back the rising tide of despair, struggling to forge sense from senselessness. "I'm nothing without him," he whispered to the empty room, voice cracking with rawness. The words felt shameful, like a confession better kept buried deep in silence. The weight of isolation settled in. Nights stretched endlessly, each hour a testament to the emptiness where Rex's companionship had been the sole anchor. His breath hitched as he remembered waking alone, reaching instinctively for the warmth beside him that was no longer there. He stood abruptly, pacing the cramped living room, the creak of worn floorboards fracturing the stillness. Each step echoed like a heartbeat in the silence, a reminder of steps taken everywhere but forward. His gaze fell on the cracked mirror above the fireplace, his reflection staring back, gaunt and haunted, eyes hollow with exhaustion and doubt. A slow burn of anger flared beneath his ribs, simmering just beneath the surface. Anger at the sterile, faceless system that had deemed his bond unworthy. At the cold letters signed by distant hands, at the rules dictating sacrifice without mercy. But even this fire was tinged with helplessness, flames flickering feebly against the weight of inevitability. John's fingers clenched into fists at his sides, nails biting into skin as he fought the urge to surrender. Words formed unsaid, tentative as if speaking them aloud might shatter the fragile hold he still sought to maintain. Hours later, the sky bled into deeper hues, twilight wrapping the world in quiet blue. He found himself unable to leave the window, the leash still coiled loosely on the floor at his feet, a silent tether to a bond fraying but unbroken. Outside, Evening settled softly over the town street lamps, flickering on like distant stars as night bled into the edges of day. The world glittered with fragile hope, and for a brief moment, something inside John cracked, not a surrender, but a fissure through which something new might emerge. His lips parted as a soft, near-forgotten sound teased at the edges of memory, the distant bark of a dog, urgent, familiar. A quiet promise that the fight was not yet over, that the bond he cherished might still hold enough strength to defy the cold machinery around him. John's gaze hardened, the quiet desperation in his eyes shifting into something sharper, something like resolve. He bent down and picked up the leash, fingers tightening their grip in silent vow. The room hummed with the heavy weight of unspoken words, of battles waged in shadows and hearts bound beyond blood. The sunset outside cast a final, golden glow through cracked glass, illuminating his weathered face with the fragile light of defiant hope. And in that light, John sat still, no longer lost, but poised on the cusp of a fight only he could begin. The sky was bruised with the purples and deep blues of dusk when John climbed the familiar slope to the small hill cemetery outside town. The cold seeped through his worn jacket, brushing over his unshaven jawline and curling his hair against his forehead. Each labored step carried the weight of despair, but also something heavier, an unspoken need, a restless yearning that tugged at his gut with every breath. The graveyard was quiet except for the occasional whisper of wind through brittle autumn leaves. A soft rustle stirred at his feet, and as his fingers brushed aside the scattered foliage near a time-worn stone, something caught his eye. Tucked beneath the roots of an old oak, half hidden in dirt and dust, was a faded photograph. John knelt, careful not to disturb the fragile earth. The paper crackled faintly as he lifted it to the dimming light. His own face smiled from the pastro, younger, eyes bright despite the grime of war. Beside him, Rex sat proudly, alert, ears pricked forward, eyes steady and intelligent. The leash looped loosely between them, a frozen moment of unbreakable bond, captured and preserved in silver and shadow. John's chest tightened as memories surged, pain and warmth entwined like the colors of the gathering twilight. Here was proof of their journey, a testament that had somehow survived the chaos of battles and bureaucracies alike. He pressed the photograph to his lips, the edges rough against his skin. The dog tags around his neck chimed softly, a steady rhythm matching the cautious rebirth of hope stirring inside him. His hand wrapped around the leash hanging from his coat pocket. Not yet forgotten, not surrendered. The bond lived still, fierce and unyielding. With eyes reflecting the last embers of sunset, John exhaled slowly. The grief that had shadowed him shifted imperceptibly, folding into a silent vow. Rex was more than a military asset, more than a pawn in a system blind to loyalty's true cost. They had survived fire and fury together. They would fight this injustice as fiercely as those battles once waged. As twilight surrendered to night, the first stars blinked open like faint beacons of possibility. John rose, the photograph and leash tucked carefully into his jacket. His silhouette carved against the darkening sky stood tall, not as a man defeated, but as one rekindling the flame of defiance. Above him, the wind whispered through the oaks a soft chorus that promised this story was far from over. Morning broke over the quiet town like a slow symphony, the pale light seeping through fog and skeletal limbs of trees. John stepped out onto his porch, eyes scanning the misty horizon as the world around him stirred to wary life. The air was sharp, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp leaves and distant smoke from a neighbor's fire. His fingertips played absently with the dog tags at his neck, each motion a flicker of the battles fought inside and out. The photograph from the graveyard lay atop the worn table in his small living room, corners curling slightly as if eager to whisper its silent power. That image, the quiet bond, The stillness before the storm haunted him with a pulse of hope and a tether of necessity. Today marked something different. The first day he would fight not just for Rex, but for himself. John pulled on his muddy boots, the weight grounding him. Outside, the town's rhythm pushed forward a rusty pickup groaned down the cracked asphalt. Children's laughter tumbled faintly from a distant playground, and somewhere nearby, the bark of a dog cracked the morning's calm. His heart caught the sound, sharp and bittersweet. He approached the local Veterans Center, a modest brick building against a backdrop of skeletal trees and iron-gray skies. Inside, voices blended with the low hum of a heating unit, papers shuffled, and the tang of coffee brewed thick in chipped mugs. Faces, hardened but kind, turned as he entered, brothers and sisters in scars both visible and hidden. John, a familiar voice called out. Maria, a silver-haired woman with eyes like steel and a smile that softened her features, approached. "We heard about Rex. We're with you." Her words, simple yet fierce, ignited a fragile fire within. It wasn't just his battle. The room became a flurry of action fingers flung open laptops, phones buzzed quietly, and a small group huddled around John, sharing stories, resources, and ideas. He learned quickly how the gears of the local press could be turned, how the reach of a petition could spread wings. "This letter," Maria said, handing him a carefully typed draft, "needs your voice. Your story." John's eyes scanned the words, the legal jargon softened by human pain and resolve. He hesitated, then nodded, his signature a scratch of commitment echoing in the silence. But the fight was not without its shadows. Calls went unanswered, letters disappeared into the bureaucracy's maw, and skepticism flickered like a dull poison in once hopeful eyes. The media caught wind. A local newspaper published a brief story, the headline sharp and urgent: "Veteran battles military mandate over service dog." Comments flooded in voices both supportive and cruel. John's phone buzzed relentlessly, the weight of public scrutiny heavy on his shoulders. The leash in his pocket felt suddenly heavier, a reminder of what was still at stake. One evening, beneath the jaundiced glow of a street lamp, John stood frozen outside a closed diner. Rain began to fall in quiet sheets, soaking him to the bone. The chill seeped through his jacket, but a voice interrupted the ache, soft, confident. "Don't give up, John." He turned sharply. A man stepped out of the shadows, an older soldier, eyes sharp but warm, bearing the insignia of battles past. "We fought more than rules, more than papers. We fight for memory, for survival." The encounter was brief, a nod and a fade back into the night. But the words, weighty, unshakable, lingered like fire smoldering beneath ashes. John's resolve stiffened, a quiet promise tightening behind weary eyes. This struggle was no longer just about Rex, it was about reclaiming something stripped away in silence. As dawn crept toward another restless day, John's phone chimed sharply. An anonymous message blinked on the screen. "There's more to this fight than they tell you. Be careful who you trust." The weight in his hand shifted, the leash, the tags, the silhouette of a war-torn past now steering toward an uncertain future. In the distance, Rex's bark echoed, faint but real, mourning and hopeful all at once. John swallowed hard, the breath thick with unease and stubborn flame. The fight had begun not in victory, but in the gritty, raw pulse of survival. The sun struggled through clouds above, casting a muted light that flickered uncertainly like the fragile hope riding on that leash between them. The days bled together like the slow leaking of gray rain through trenches, damp, cold, and relentless. John sat at the small kitchen table, papers strewn in disorder before him. His fingers drummed restlessly on faded wood, the dog tags shifting with each subtle movement against his chest. Outside, the wind carved mournful songs through bare branches, the sky a muted canvas of steel and sorrow. Weeks had passed since the petition was sent, since the headlines flickered briefly across pages and screens. Yet replies were thin, trapped in the labyrinth of military jargon. Official answers arrived as frustrating echoes of cold procedure, misplacing forms, delaying hearings, cloaked in legalese that twisted meaning and hope alike. John's phone buzzed incessantly, an unyielding tide of messages, some words of encouragement, many drowning in doubt. His support network frayed under pressure, uncertainty seeping into their ranks like poison. The phone's glow in the dim room was both a lifeline and a torment. Maria sat opposite, her presence steady but her eyes shadowed with concern. "They're stonewalling," she whispered, voice brittle. John's jaw clenched. "They want me to disappear." Outside, the sun wrestled unsuccessfully with thick clouds, a lifeless dance of shadow and reluctant light. Each day, the fight felt more like a battle against a faceless enemy, a labyrinthine machine that consumed conviction and spat out frustration. One afternoon, John stood before the towering, impersonal gates of the military base. The wind tugged fiercely at his jacket as his heart pounded a dissonant rhythm against the sweep of cold metal and concrete. A sea of identical uniforms passed without glance, their faces blank masks of discipline and detachment. He clutched a folder bursting with letters, petitions, and photos, a tangible testament of his struggle. Approaching the guardhouse, he presented his case, voice steady but edged with desperation. "I need to speak to someone." "About Rex." The officer, young and unsmiling, scanned the documents, his eyes glazed over with trained apathy. "Requests are processed through proper channels. No exceptions." John's fists curled around the folder. "Rex isn't just a dog. He saved lives. My life." The officer's gaze flickered briefly before hardening. "Procedures do not account for sentiment, Private." John swallowed the bitter taste of rejection. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Follow orders," the officer replied, turning away. Night draped its cold cloak over the town as John entered the dim-lit veteran center again. Faces greeted him with a mixture of sympathy and skepticism. Some had started to drift, their hope dampened like the fading embers of a dying fire. In a quiet corner, a few stalwarts clustered, sharing whispered strategies and stolen moments of strength. The weight of battle hung heavy outside the war zone but inside a tangled web of resistance. A message from the local newspaper editor sparked a flicker of light, an invitation for John to speak on camera, to tell his story to a wider audience. The recording was raw. John's voice cracked with vulnerability yet burned with quiet defiance. "This isn't just about a dog or a soldier. It's about honor, loyalty, and a bond the system won't acknowledge. We deserve better." The segment aired, sending ripples through the community. Supporters rallied, but so did the watchers of the system, cold eyes behind desks, calculating moves in response. Days later, John received news that shattered tentative Victoria's a misplaced file, an official letter denying his appeal due to insufficient grounds. The words hit harder than any bullet wound, driving doubt like a shadow between his supporters. Maria's face was pale when she told him, "They're using legal loopholes to stall. We can't depend only on the law." John's hands trembled. The leash in his coat pocket suddenly felt heavier, a symbol both of bond and imprisonment. Anguish fought with resolve. The fight to hold on to Rex now felt like a battle against his own unraveling. That night, rain rattled against the window panes like a frantic heartbeat. John sat, staring into the darkness, the photograph of him and Rex resting open on the table, edges curling like silent prayers. A knock at the door broke the silence. He opened it cautiously to find an older man, someone he hadn't seen before but whose presence radiated quiet authority. With a voice low and steady, the stranger said, "I know what you're fighting for." And I might have some answers you won't find in letters or petitions. But you need to be careful who you trust. John's breath caught. Who are you? Just someone who's been where you are. And seen what this system hides. The stranger slipped a worn envelope into John's hand and vanished into the rain-soaked night as quickly as he'd appeared. John closed the door slowly, the envelope cold in his palm. Inside, a handful of faded papers hinted at undisclosed regulations and buried truths, whispers of psychological studies, exemptions, and protocols ignored. The weight of hope and danger mingled, swirling around him like the storm raging beyond the window. He looked to the horizon where the sun barely pierced the overcast sky, a fragile light fighting against the dark. Breathing deeply, John realized the battle was far from over. What lay ahead was uncertain, but the spark of defiance burned brighter. And deep in the silence, Rex's distant bark echoed once more, sharp, urgent, impossible to ignore. The thin morning light found John hunched at the edge of his bed, the room sparse and shadowed by the early hour. His hands trembled as they held the envelope the stranger had left, a battered, manila mien with creases like battle scars. The air was thick with dust and memories. The dog tags around his neck whispered softly against his skin like faint ghosts of promises made and broken. Carefully, he pulled the papers free. The faded text spoke volumes, fragments of forgotten studies, psychological assessments buried deep within military archives, and references to protocols overlooked or lost in red tape. They suggested something revolutionary. A formal recognition of the mental health benefits animals like Rex provided to veterans recovering from the unseen wounds of war. A charged silence filled the room as the weight of that revelation crashed over him. The system that had dismissed him, that had wielded cold bureaucratic judgment, harbored secrets that might just be the key to turning this fight around. His mind raced, heart-hammering with a precarious mix of hope and skepticism. But amid the flood of emotion came a darker current, the realization that for all the time and effort he'd invested in battling faceless administrators, the truth had been close, almost within reach, yet deliberately kept from him. John's thoughts drifted back to the photograph pressed beneath the papers on the small tablethe image of him and Rex, frozen in camaraderie and trust. The leash, the dog tags, the fading light of sunset in the background, it all swirled together now, tinged with renewed significance. His breath hitched as he remembered the countless nights of restless wandering, the solace found only in Rex's steady presence. This was no simple loss of a service dog, it was a stripping away of a lifeline. He reached for his phone and scrolled through messages, eyes catching the most recent Notia request to reconsider his appeal had been quietly denied, citing insufficient grounds with no further explanation. The letter had the unmistakable stamp of official rejection, cold and final. John closed his eyes, an unbearable ache settling into his chest. The fight had taken everything, the patience, the faith, the very fibers of his being stretched thin like the worn leash still coiled in his pocket. Lonely shadows crept across his walls as the afternoon light waned. Suddenly, the phone buzzed again, an encrypted message flashing briefly before disappearing. A name flickered across the screen, unfamiliar but urgent. "Meet me. I have the truth." He stared at the glowing screen, heart pounding. Doubt clawed at him, yet beneath it, a fragile ember of trust sparked. Against the chilling wind howling outside, John rose, wrapped his battered jacket tighter, and stepped into the growing dusk. Outside, the sun slipped beneath the horizon, bleeding crimson and gold across the sky, a fleeting blaze of hope against an encroaching night. In that moment, everything changed. The fight was no longer just his, it was entering a shadowed world of secrets, risks, and revelations that promised answers but threatened everything else. The leash in his coat pocket felt heavier, transformed from symbol of constraint to a totem of determination. And as the stars blinked awake in the darkening sky, John knew he stood at a crossroads, one that would force him to confront not only the system that sought to divide him and Rex but also the deepest truths within himself. The room was cloaked in a suffocating silence, broken only by the slow drip of water leaking from a cracked faucet somewhere in the shadows. John sat motionless on the threadbare couch, muscles twitching with the weight of exhaustion and grief. His eyes, once sharp and vigilant, now glazed over with tears dulled by hopelessness. Around him, the walls seemed to close in, painted in muted grays and blues that mirrored the storm raging within. The scent of damp earth and cold metal clung to the ghostly echo of the war zones where he'd fought and lost so much. Yet this battle was silent, fought behind closed doors, in the cold corridors of bureaucracy that had ripped Rex from his side. The leash, now coiled and abandoned on the floor, felt like a symbol of all he had lost. The official letter lay on the cracked wooden coffee table, its finality carved into every typed line. Appeal rejected. The words mocked him, a cruel verdict that severed the last thread of hope. Outside, rain lashed against broken windows, thrumming with relentless force as if the heavens grieved alongside him. Shadows of raindrops raced down the glass, twisting and refracting under the muted glow of a dying street lamp. Each drop echoed a pulse of loneliness, a vast emptiness swallowing his world whole. John's breath hitched as memories assaulted him, Rex's alert eyes scanning for danger, the soft brush of fur against his palm during restless nights, the steady heartbeat of companionship that anchored his fractured soul. Now, those moments were ghosts, slipping further into the abyss of what could never be again. His body went rigid, fists clenched tight enough to whiten fingers. A strangled sob escaped his throat, raw and guttural, swallowed quickly by the crushing silence. Words failed him, and with them, the strength to fight diminished. The room's dim light flickered, shadows dancing across the cracked ceiling like silent phantoms, mirroring the turmoil within. The rain's cadence grew louder, invading the room with cold fingers that seemed to crawl beneath his skin. The dog tags at his neck felt heavier now, a cold reminder of battles far behind but never forgotten. They pressed against his chest like a weight he could no longer bear. He rose slowly, each movement hollow and deliberate, and wandered towards the window. Outside, the world was gray and unyielding, blurred by the relentless downpour. John pressed his palm against the wet glass, eyes closing as he leaned his forehead against the cold surface. The distant wail of a siren pierced the night, mingling with the thunder, a cacophony of loss and despair. No words came. No pleas. Only the heavy breath of a man unraveling, the slow descent into a silence so deep it swallowed all else. The leash lay forgotten on the floor, a silent witness to a bond forcibly broken, to a hope extinguished. The photograph of John and Rex, once a beacon of their unyielding bond, rested folded and forgotten in the shadows. Outside, the storm raged on, relentless and unforgiving, mirroring the collapse of a soul once unbreakable. The house was swallowed by an oppressive silence that clung to everything: the worn furniture, the peeling wallpaper, the lone chair where John sat facing the dim window. Outside, the biting cold seeped through cracked frames, painting frost patterns across the glass like brittle scars. The night was shrouded in black velvet, pierced only by the faint, distant howl of a Doan echo of a presence that once filled the empty spaces around him. John's breath condensed in shallow clouds as he stared blankly into the gathering darkness beyond the window, eyes hollow and unblinking. The flame of the single candle on the table flickered weakly, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the walls, mirrors of his fractured soul. The leash, now discarded, lay tangled beside it, inert and forgotten, a symbol of the bond severed. His body curled inward, a fragile shell around a void no warmth could heal. A low, ragged sigh escaped him, swallowed quickly by the night like a secret too heavy to bear. The photograph he had tucked away beneath the empty plate on the table sat face down, its silence louder than any words. Time-fractured minutes bled into hours, days into endless stretches of numbness. John drifted through moments like a ghost, his world reduced to cold rooms and colder thoughts. The muted tick of the wall clock became a cruel metronome, counting the slow unraveling of everything he held dear. Outside, the wind whispered through the skeletal branches of trees, carrying a mournful lament that seeped through the walls and wrapped around his heart. Each gust seemed to steal away a fragment of his resolve, leaving behind only shards of desolation. A sudden, fleeting sound, a creak on the floor, a sigh from the air jolted him, but no comfort followed. He whispered a single word, barely audible, as if trying to summon a ghost. Rex. The word hung suspended, fading into the void, unanswered. John's fingers reached out instinctively for the dog tags resting on his chest, tracing their cold edges like a desperate prayer. The metallic chill grounded him in a brutal reality: the war within and without was far from over. Without warning, the candle flickered violently and died, plunging the room into suffocating darkness. John remained motionless, swallowed by the night, his eyes reflecting only the void. In that engulfing blackness, surrounded by silence more deafening than any cry, he sat a man undone. The emptiness was absolute. The house remained cloaked in a heavy quiet, the kind that presses against the chest and makes every breath a labor. John sat slumped near the fractured window, the glass cracked like the fissures running through his own spirit. Outside, the sky was a wash of deep indigo, softened by the faint glow of stars, silent witnesses to grief and endurance. His fingers brushed absently over the cool metal of the dog tags hanging low against his chest. Each tag echoed stories unspoken, etched with the names of battles and lost comrades. Tonight, they felt less like honor, more like chains, cold reminders of a past relentlessly clawing through his present. The leash lay coiled beside him, an emblem of connection forced to lie dormant. He gazed at it with hollow eyes, the symbol of control and love entwined in cruel contradiction. Memories surged the moment they had first met: Rex's steady gaze unwavering in chaos, the warmth shared on countless nights that had felt too dark to survive alone. A slow breeze slipped through the broken window, carrying a sympathy and familiar, pulling John sharply from his reverie. It was the faintest whisper of autumn leaves, a fragment of the warm days past, but to him, it was the fragile thread of something more. Hope. His hand instinctively reached toward the photograph folded carefully in his jacket pocket, the image of him and Rex framed by the dying light of a distant sunset. He pulled it free, unfolding the worn edges with reverence, and let the picture rest against his knee. As he stared into Rex's calm eyes, a whisper of resolve bloomed, not loud, not fierce, but a quiet promise that this story was far from finished. Suddenly, a soft knock came at the door. Startled, John paused, heart hammering unevenly. Slowly, he rose and opened it to find a small envelope resting on the threshold. No name, no message, just a seal worn and faded. Inside was a single sheet of paper: "Not all battles are fought in daylight. There is a way." A shiver ran through him, fear, uncertainty, but beneath it, the faintest pulse of possibility. The shadows in the room seemed less oppressing, as if the words had cast the smallest crack in the darkness. John tucked the note carefully into his jacket, his jaw tightening with a new kind of determination, fragile but palpable. Outside, the night sky deepened, and the first hints of dawn began painting the horizon a muted strip of soft gold, a hesitant promise of renewal. He stepped back from the window, breathing in steady and slow, as the leash remained on the floor, silent but no longer forgotten. The world had fallen away, but in its place, the faint light of a new fight flickered, quiet, uncertain, but unmistakably alive. The morning sun pressed gently against the cold glass window, its light seeping through the thin curtains with a softness that felt like a tentative promise. John sat still in the dim room, the weight of recent nights refusing to lift, but in this new light, shadows seemed less oppressive, the air warmer, carrying whispers of renewal. His fingers absent-mindedly traced the edges of the worn photograph resting on the cracked wooden table. His and Rex's faces bathed in golden twilight, eyes locked in silent understanding. The leash, coiled and weathered, lay beside it, no longer a symbol of loss but a fragile tether to what still might be. Outside, a pale breeze stirred the brittle leaves of the skeletal trees, their rustling a quiet song of endurance. The distant hum of the town waking echoed faintly, life moving forward, relentless and indifferent, but for John, it was something new, a signal that the world hadn't abandoned him yet. He exhaled slowly, the breath warm against the chill of the room, carrying with it the memory of a note, the cryptic message from a stranger that had ignited the faintest spark beneath his despair. It whispered of a loophole, a hidden path through the labyrinth of bureaucracy, a bridge back to Rex. His eyes, dulled by grief, flickered with the first hint of determination. The fight was far from over. Indeed, it was entering a new phase, one where knowledge and courage began to intertwine. John rose unsteadily, boots echoing against the worn floorboards of his small home, and gathered the scattered papers, the evidence, the petitions, the fragments of hope. He spread them carefully across the table, poring over the faded documents with renewed clarity. Within the jumble of regulations, he began to discern patterns, overlooked clauses, the faint outlines of an argument that law and love could align. It was painstaking, a meticulous unraveling of the complex threads binding him to loss. Each discovery, each quiet piece of the puzzle pieced together, kindled a fragile resolve. The dog tags lay heavy around his neck, but no longer only as a reminder of sacrifice. Now, they were emblems of a fight that still had meaning. He paused by the window, looking out where the sun climbed steadily, bathing the sky in soft hues of rose and amber. The town below strayed, a world distant yet tantalizingly near. A sudden knock at the door broke the silence. John opened it slowly to find Maria standing there, her weathered face edged with concern but warmed by a smile. She held a steaming cup of coffee, her gesture a small, profound act of solidarity. "You're not alone in this," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his with unwavering support. "We're still with you." John nodded, a slow, almost imperceptible smile breaking through. "Thank you. I'm ready to keep fighting." The morning stretched onward, light weaving through the room, softening corners and bruised memories alike. The battle ahead would still be long, filled with uncertainty and sacrifice, but now there was a thread of light threading through the darkness. As John turned back to the table, papers fluttering in the gentle breeze from the open window, he felt the stirrings of something once thought lost, hope, fragile and unyielding. The sunset that had once symbolized an ending now faintly promised a beginning. The late afternoon sun cast long, fractured shadows across the cracked sidewalks, dappling the silent streets of the small town with a fleeting warmth that seemed almost reluctant to stay. John stood outside the towering gates of the military headquarters, his weathered boots planted firmly on the uneven pavement, the worn leather of his jacket creaking softly with each breath he took. The dog tags around his neck clinked with a metallic clarity that somehow cut through the hum of distant engines and muted voices. His eyes, once glazed by despair, now held a sharpness, the quiet determination of a man poised on the cusp of something greater than fear. Inside, the building rose impassive and cold. Rows of windows reflected the fading sky, a mirror of the uncertainty ahead. John's fingers tightened around the leash coiled in his hand, not just a tether, but a symbol of the bond he would refuse to relinquish. He was ushered into a cramped, sterile office where the air smelled of institutional indifference and stale coffee. Behind a cluttered desk sat a man whose sharp gaze flickered with calculated reserve. The figure flicked through John's carefully compiled documents, petitions, legal briefs, psychological studies, yet there was no hint of concession. "You understand the regulations, Private," the man said, voice clipped and firm. "The decisions here are final." John met the gaze unflinchingly. "Regulations are written by people. People who can be shown the truth." The silence stretched taut between them, the weight of unspoken challenges pressing coldly into the room. Then, slowly, John laid out the evidence how service dogs like Rex were integral to healing the invisible wounds of war, their companionship not a luxury, but a lifeline. He spoke of nights spent in silence, broken only by Rex's presence, the unspoken language that tethered him to a world beyond anguish. As he spoke, memories surged, rapid-fire flashes of Rex's eyes in dim trenches, the soft nudge that kept him tethered to the present, the quiet promise carried in a single leash. The man behind the desk leaned back, the rigid defenses wavering for a bare, fragile moment. "You risk much by pushing against the chain of command," he warned. John's voice held steady. "I risk losing the only thing that keeps me grounded. That's a risk I'm willing to take." Hours passed in this charged standoff, words exchanged not just as arguments, but as pleas for recognition and justice. When John finally rose to leave, the man handed him a single sheet, details of a procedural hearing, a chance for formal appeal. Outside, the sky bloomed with the fiery hues of sunset, bleeding gold and crimson that wrapped the town in a warm glow. John looked up, the colors mirrored in his determined eyes. For a moment, the weight of the day felt less crushing, replaced by a fragile lightness. He uncoiled the leash, fingers gripping the worn leather as if feeling Rex's presence beside him. The dog tags sang softly against his chest, a gentle reminder of battles fought and battles still to come. The sharp air carried the scent of pine and earth, mingling with the distant bark of a Doan echo that stirred a deep ache and an ember of hope. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched and intertwined, like two souls bound across even the widest separations. John inhaled deeply, the quiet strength of the moment weaving through every fiber of his being. He took a tentative step forward, each footfall a testament to renewal, courage, and the unyielding bond that tethered him to Rex. As the first stars blinked awake overhead, a calm settled over the town, gentle and resolute. And somewhere far away, as night softened the edges of despair, John felt the faintest whisper of promise, the possibility that love, like light, could break through even the darkest of nights. The sun dipped low beyond the horizon, spilling molten gold and burning amber across the sprawling military compound. The fading light painted long, shifting shadows that stretched and recoiled like silent sentinels across cold stone and steel. John stood near the gated enclosure where Rex was held, the leash coiled tightly in his gloved hand, no longer a symbol of loss but one of reclaimed purpose. His silhouette was sharp against the kaleidoscope of the setting sun, every line of his rugged form carved with resolve. The worn military jacket, once heavy with the weight of defeat, now seemed imbued with quiet dignity. The dog tags around his neck caught the dying light, casting tiny flickers that danced like whispered memories of battles fought and bonds unbroken. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, mixing with the distant hum of activity, but John's focus was narrow, centered on the figure that approached through the shadows, a man from the upper echelons of command, his posture rigid but eyes betraying the faintest trace of respect. "So this is the man who refuses to relinquish what was never truly his to lose," the figure began, voice low, edged with guarded recognition. John's gaze didn't falter. "Rex is more than a service dog or a tool of war. He's a brother, a protector, a lifeline. You forget what that means because you see only papers and policies." The tension between them was a taut wire stretched to its limit, but John's voice softened, a bridge offered instead of a chasm. I fought for more than orders. For more than rank. I fought for people like Hammond, the hope that we can survive together." The man faltered, then nodded slowly, the faintest acknowledgement of truth. "You're playing a dangerous game, John." "Maybe," John replied. "But sometimes, you have to risk everything to reclaim what's right. Not just for me or Rex, but for every soldier silenced by system and routine." As the words hung in the cooling air, a sudden stir erupted near the enclosure. Rex's silhouette emerged from the shadows, eyes gleaming with sharp intelligence, tail low but wagging with calm assurance. He broke free from the custody meant to contain him, moving swift and sure like a spirit unleashed. John's breath caught, frozen for a heartbeat in disbelief and overwhelming relief. Rex bounded toward him through the narrowing dusk, the golden light bathing their reunion in surreal warmth. The leash slipped from John's hand, falling silent to the ground as he crouched, arms outstretched. They collided in a tangle of fur and flesh, a melding of years of trust and sacrifice unspoken yet fully understood. The sunset blazed behind them, fiery and triumphant, painting the sky in streaks of hope and renewal. The past's heavy shadows receded, replaced by a radiant promise forged in love, courage, and unyielding bond. John rose, the weight of his scars anchoring him but no longer defining him. Rex stood by his side, their silhouettes bathed in the fading light, a testament to survival, resistance, and redemption. His voice was calm, steady, filled with fierce clarity. "We're not done yet. This fight goes beyond us. But together, we make it impossible to ignore." The wind caught the edges of his jacket, the dog tags chiming like a call to arms, a hymn to unbroken spirit. As night crept over the land and stars ignited above, John faced the horizon no longer a man broken by loss but transformed by love and determination, ready to challenge the darkness with a light that could not be extinguished. The early dawn spilled gentle amber across the rolling hills, casting a warm glow that softened the rugged contours of the landscape. On a quiet hilltop, the air was still, filled with the tender hush of newfound peace. John sat on a weathered wooden bench, eyes distant, gazing at the horizon where the sky melted into a canvas of muted gold and lavender. His face, lined and weathered by struggles and sacrifices, carried a calm that time and hardship had yet to diminish. Beside him, Rex lay curled, his calm eyes reflecting the serenity of the moment, their silent bond unbreakable despite all that had transpired. The weight of the past, even the pain of betrayal and loss, seemed to have settled into a gentle stillness, like the soft breathing of the earth itself. John's hand rested lightly on Rex's head, fingers brushing the smooth coat, a subtle gesture of gratitude and reconciliation. The dog, alert and calm, pressed into him softly, as if offering silent reassurance. The sunset, still lingering on the distant horizon, cast a tender glow that lingered like an unspoken prayer. The sky's colors faded gradually into deeper shades of violet and navy, the stars flickering into life. The moment was quiet, a sacred pause in a relentless journey where wounds had begun to heal not through words or grand victories but through acceptance and understanding. John closed his eyes briefly. The sound of his own breathing was steady, peaceful. Every scar, every hidden ache, was now cradled in the tenderness of forgiveness for himself, for the bitter battles fought in silence, and for the love that had quietly endured beyond chaos and despair. A gentle breeze stirred, carrying the fleeting scent of pine and wildflowers. The world around him was alive with subtle whispers of hope, delicate yet resilient as nature softly embraced the silent triumph of the human spirit. In that stillness, he allowed himself a rare moment of vulnerability and acceptance of the long, winding path that had led him here. The chaos had ebbed, the tears had dried, and in their place, a gentle conviction bloomed. To love, to sacrifice, to endure, it all made sense now, woven into the fabric of this peaceful dawn. And so, with quiet dignity, John rested his hand on Rex's back, resting among the gentle rhythms of their shared presence. In the light of the fading sunset, he understood that some battlesome wounds are finally mended in the quiet, in the soft surrender of the heart. The camera pulled back slowly, capturing the tender tableauman and dog, united in stillness, bathed in the soft glow of hope and quiet strengthened eternal bond reaffirmed beneath the serene vastness of the awakening world. The horizon shimmered in shades of purple and gold as the twilight deepened, cloaking the hilltop in a tender veil of serenity. John and Rex sat quietly, their silhouettes etched softly against the vast expanse of dusklit sky. The world around them had fallen into a hushed reverence, an unspoken acknowledgement of the journey they had traveled through: pain, loss, hope, and finally, peace. John reached out slowly, fingers trembling slightly, and gently stroked Rex's thick fur, feeling the steady, warm pulse beneath the calm exterior. The bond that had been tested and tarnished now radiated brighter, infused with a deeper understanding that forgiveness was not forgetting, but accepting and loving anyway. The dog, eyes soft and unwavering, leaned into John's touch, offering silent reassurance. They shared a glance. No words needed, just an unbreakable promise written in every look, every breath, every heartbeat. Behind them, the last rays of sunset lingered, casting the landscape in a shimmer of molten light, a fleeting reminder of transient beauty and enduring love. The distant sounds of life stirred gentle waves of wind, the whisper of grasses, yet here, in this moment, silence reigned, pure and sacred. John's eyes filled with quiet tears, not of sorrow but of release. Every wound he carried, the scars of battles fought within and without, began to heal in this sacred space of peace. His past was acknowledged, its lessons embraced, yet it no longer chained him. Forgiveness had unlocked the chains. He looked down at Rex, the loyal heart that had never wavered, and softly uttered, "We're finally free." The words felt sacred, both a promise and a prayer resonating in the still air. As the light faded into the embrace of night, a gentle breeze stirred, carrying the scent of pine and earth, reminders of the long road behind and the promise of paths yet to come. With a slow, deliberate movement, John rose, stretching slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. In that act of rising, he freed himself from the shadows that once haunted him, stepping into a future born from love, sacrifice, and forgiveness. Together, man and dog turned their gaze towards the distant horizon, where the stars flickered into existence, each one a silent witness to a story of redemption and hope. The camera captured their figures, silhouetted against the celestial tapestry, a perfect symbol of eternal bonds unbroken by time or silence. And in the quiet that followed, they remained silent, whole, sharing a moment that would echo across eternity. The last light of sunset dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft robes of amber and lavender. The hilltop was quiet, almost sacred, a place where time seemed to pause, cradled in the gentle embrace of dusk. John and Rex sat side by side, their silhouettes etched against the fading glow, a perfect harmony of man and dog, forever bound by love and resilience. The wind whispered through the grasses, carrying the scent of earth and distant pine, a natural lullaby that soothed the ache of years. Around them, the vastness stretched in tranquil silence, a canvas of eternity in which their story found its gentle closure. Rex's calm eyes looked upward, reflecting the last fleeting rays of light, a quiet understanding passing between the man and spoken peace that words could never fully capture. John reached out slowly, fingertips trembling, but gentle, to brush Rex's fur. The rough coat was warm beneath his touch, a living testament to loyalty tested and love unbroken. His heart swelled with a profound gratitude and acceptance that, in this moment, healing had finally found its home. In the depths of the serenity, he closed his eyes briefly, savoring the stillness. Memories flickered softly, battles fought, sacrifices made, love given freely without fear or hesitation. Every scar, every tear, had woven them together in a tapestry of resilience. Here, under the vast, starlit sky, they were whole. A soft breath escaped him, a sigh of relief and unburdening. In the quiet darkness, his fierce resolve had softened into gentle surrender, a recognition that some battlesome wounds are mended in the quiet acceptance of what simply is. The camera pulled back slowly, capturing the gentle union of man and dog, silhouetted against the infinite tapestry of twilight and stars, a symbol of eternal bonds, unbreakable, unforgotten, everlasting. And as the scene faded into silence, the image lingered, dusk melding into night, a moment of peace etched forever in the soul of the universe, a testament to love's enduring light. What would you have done in his place? Share your thoughts below.